Hello again. The recent statement by the Ukrainian Minister of Defense that his country is a de facto member of NATO was largely overlooked here in the West, but it's unlikely that the Russians will ignore such a flagrant provocation. It was, after all, partly to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO that the Russians launched their invasion of the country in the first place. We are, of course, all very relaxed in this country about NATO, but that is just because their military operations all take place a long way away, and we soon forget all about them. Who today remembers the 7,000 bombing sorties flown by NATO against Libya, which took place in 2011? No? Surely, though, you remember when NATO bombed Pakistan that same year. What? You've forgotten about this as well? Come, come, it was only 12 years ago. What about the 110 cruise missiles which we launched against Libya that year? Anybody remember them? I mention these things because we in the West seem to have become hypnotized by a very strange narrative in which we are peace loving people who wring our hands over the barbarism of other nations who bomb the hell out of different countries without any formal declaration of war. And yet, we seem to have a mental block when it comes to remembering what our own side has been up to over the last few years. All well and good criticising Russia for using missiles to attack Ukraine's infrastructure, but it seems to be fine when we do the same thing in Libya or Yugoslavia. Surely somebody must remember when we were raining down missiles on Belgrade, taking out the television station and so on, killing hundreds of civilians in the process. 1999 ring any bells with anybody? I don't wish to appear sarcastic, but over the last couple of decades, I have watched as NATO has grown increasingly aggressive, attacking any country which they feel like. These have been undeclared wars. Libya was given no warning of those 7,000 bombing missions. Whether in Africa, Europe, or Asia, NATO appears to believe it has a perfect right to bomb anybody at all as the mood takes it. At least two of those countries attacked by NATO, Syria and Serbia, are strong allies of Russia, and Russian troops were based in both countries. On both occasions, it was only by chance that Russian forces were not struck by the NATO attacks. In 2001, NATO invaded and occupied Afghanistan, a country right on the border of what used to be the Soviet Union. After 25 years of this kind of aggressive military action, one can understand why the Russians might be less than enthusiastic about the idea of having NATO move even closer to their country, indeed taking over what was until 1954 the very heart of Russia. I'm not on the Russian side in the present war, but I can certainly see why they do not trust NATO's intentions. NATO has been fighting aggressive wars in three continents over the last 25 years or so, and to an unbiased observer, it looks as though if anybody is behaving in an expansionist fashion and targeting weak countries to attack, it is NATO rather than Russia. The problem is, I suppose, that Russia is such an old enemy. We have vague memories still of the Cold War and the supposed threat from the Soviet Union. The Russians were our enemies from the end of the Second World War onward, and so it's very easy to slip back into the habit and cast them once more as the major threat to world peace that we were all taught to see them as during the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. There's something quite nostalgic about being able to complain once again of the machinations of those dreadful dictators in the Kremlin. It has a familiar air about it, and it makes us feel at home. It was fun regarding Muslim fanatics as a people posing a deadly threat to our nation, but it feels much more right, comfortable to be able to worry about what Moscow is up to. All I'm asking viewers to do is to think a little more deeply about Russia and NATO and not to accept ready digested the view which is being pushed in every newspaper and every news channel that we watch. I am no supporter of Vladimir Putin, who is indeed a ruthless dictator, but his fears about NATO may well have some substance for all that. I wouldn't personally trust NATO as far as I could throw it. As usual, I give links in the description to this video to some of what I have been talking about.